President Trump was never comfortable with the idea that sanctions could be relaxed on the nuclear issue if it was still responsible for financing violence. That's exactly where we are today. Add to this serious skepticism from America's allies, and you've got all the makings of a really interesting interview with the president of the Global Policy Institute, Paolo von Schirach. Europe is, I don't know if the word is hesitant, skeptical. Why are they sort of holding back?
Well, of course, there is still memory of old stuff. You remember WMDs?
Sure.
You know,
yellow cake.
Their yellow cake, all that stuff, a slam dunk, you know. And then it turned out it wasn't true. Of course, many at the time said it was all fabricated intentionally, and it was all a conspiracy. Or if you want to be more benevolent, you can say that American intelligence was just dead wrong, if you want to be benevolent. But on the strength of that experience, many Europeans say, hey, wait a minute, is it really true that the Iranians are behind these attacks against the tankers? Let's give it a careful study.
What else could the U.S. put forward to the international community so they would get on board?
Well, usually you produce evidence. You know, you show evidence. Maybe you do it behind closed doors if you don't want to reveal, you know, methods and what have you. But that's what you do. You say, okay, guys, you don't believe it? Well, here's the picture of the Iranian speedboat launching a missile against a tanker, or whatever the functional equivalent would be. That's what you do if you want to convince the skeptics. But I'm afraid, as I said, I don't think the Europeans are just skeptical. They just don't want another conflict. They just don't want, which is, geographically speaking, closer to their door than to ours here across the ocean. I think from an American perspective, we would just like the Europeans just not to be enthusiastic supporters of any, you know, go tough on Iran policy, but at the very least that they don't become spoilers. That is, that they start saying, oh, wait a minute, you know, maybe there's a way that we can still do business with Iran, and if the Iranians tell us that they're goody-goody people and they haven't done anything wrong, we may figure out a way. Okay, that's what America doesn't want, that the Europeans break the sanctions, find a way to do some level of business or facilitate doing business with Iran. That's what we don't want. We don't want them necessarily to, you know, to do the heavy lifting. After all, the assets in the region are all American.
What are we wanting? The president has said he does not want a war with Iran. No. We know that some pieces of the American government would like regime change. What do we want?
The best that I can say is that we want Iran to die by economic strangulation, where we are doing the strangulation through the sanctions, through having the interdiction of sales of oil, prohibiting Iranian banks or financial institutions in participating in what is a US-led global financial system, and by preventing the Iranians to do business, by preventing them to sell oil, by preventing them to do normal transactions of buying and selling, which includes, say, spare parts for their machinery, spare parts for their oil installations or airplanes or whatever they may need, or car parts, then little by little the country gets to be squeezed. And the administration has said many times, at least publicly, I don't know what their real game plan may be, once they get the message, the Iranians will be more pliable and come back to the negotiating table and decide finally to be good boys and stop making a mess in the neighborhood.
Which seems unlikely.
It's unlikely, but I don't know how many options does Iran have now, because they are not doing well.
Final point here. Would it help if we had better relations with our European allies? We know the past few years have really, really strained things.
Of course. Yes. The answer is yes and yes and yes. We're not on good terms with the Europeans. Mr. Trump is certainly not an admired president in the same way as many others were, including Barack Obama, for good or bad reasons. And yes, if we had smoother, more comfortable, more collegial relations with the European allies, certainly getting them on board on an American new departure, which is certainly the opposite of what the previous administration had tried to do, completely the opposite, would be perhaps a little easier.
When they talk about why alliances matter, it's a situation like this that you really need to have not only goodwill, but trust. It matters. Ahead on NEWSY.